This is part 2 of chapter 2 of part 1. The extent of the scandal. In February 2004, researchers of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice issued The Nature and Scope of Sexual Abuse of Minors by the Catholic Priests and Deacons in the United States, 1950 to 2002. According to this report, approximately 4% of the Catholic Church clergy during the period studied had been accused of sexually abusing a youth under the age of 18. It was found that 75% of abuse occurred between 1960 and 1984. Others who examined the data, such as New York Times, concluded that most of the abuse occurred during the 1970s and 1980s, and that the number of accused priests declined sharply by the 1990s. Everyone agrees that the 1970s was the worst decade. How many minors were allegedly abused in the 1993? How many minors were allegedly abused? In 1993, Father Andrew Greeley, a sociologist, speculated that there were well in excess of 100,000 victims. The John Jay social scientist, however, put the figure up at 10,667. Why was Greeley so far off? Because he assumed that on average there are 50 victims per every abusing priest. The correct number is 1. Who were the victims? The majority of victims, 81%, were male, in contrast to the distribution of victim gender for sexual crimes in the United States. Importantly, the John Jay study found that pedophilia was not the problem, even though the media constantly referred to pedophile priests. Indeed, it found that 78 of the victims were post-pubescent. About half of the victims who made allegations of abuse socialized with the priest outside of the church, and the priests were typically invited to the family homes. How many of the accusations were substantiated? A draft report of John Jay's study that was given to the bishops estimated of 61% of the accusations. A draft report of the John Jay study that was given to the bishops estimated that 61% of the accusations had been substantiated. For some explained reason, when the report was published, the figure jumped to 80%. The impression given to the public was that virtually all of the accused priests were guilty. According to the survey by the Washington Post, published in 2002, less than 1.5% of the estimated 60,000 or more men who served in the Catholic Church clergy were accused of child sexual abuse. A New York Times survey reported that 1.8% of all priests ordained between 1950 and 2001 were accused of sexually abusing minors. Thomas Kane, author of Priests Are People Too, estimated in 2002 that between 1 and 1.5% abuse of priests had charges made against them. Also in 2002, the Associated Press, AP, found that approximately 6.7% of the contemporary priests had charges pending against them. Everyone agrees that no priest should ever be involved in sexually abusing a minor, but it must also be stressed that the evidence shows that almost all priests have never been accused of abusing a young person. This fact does not get the kind of coverage it deserves. Why? Because it does not fit the narrative that so many in the media have adopted. Father Greeley was so upset with the media for not emphasizing that most priests are reasonably mature, happy men, that he concluded the sexual abuse crisis has become more of an occasion for Catholic bashing and celibate bashing. He was most incensed with the New York Times for its negative coverage, saying it had crossed the border to hostility and venture onto stomping grounds of virulent anti-Catholicism. Most common acts that priests were accused of were touching over a victim's clothing, 52.6%. Relatively few priests, however, were alleged to having committed only this act. On the other hand, most abusers did not have hundreds of victims, as some have alleged. The majority of priests, 56, were alleged to have one abuse victim. Nearly 27 were alleged to have abused 2 or 3 victims. Nearly 14 were alleged to have abused 4 to 9 victims, and 3.4 were alleged to have abused more than 10 victims. The next statistic is rarely reported. The 149 priests, 3.5%, who had more than 10 allegations of abuse, were allegedly responsible for abusing 2,960 victims, thus accounting for 26% of allegations. Therefore, a very small percentage of accused priests are responsible for a substantial percentage of the allegations. My italics. This is astonishing. Of the 4,393 priests who had an accusation made against between 1950 and 2002, not all of which were substantiated, a mere 149 of them accounted for more than a quarter of the allegations. Data like this disproves the conventional wisdom that most priests are predator. It is a malicious lie. Did the reform work? Another great lie about the Catholic Church is that the sexual abuse scandal continues unabated. This is utter nonsense. To be sure, there are still serious issues, such as failure of the Vatican to explain in a timely fashion who knew what and when about Theodore McCarrick, the disgraced former cardinal. But in terms of the scope of the scandal, it has long ceased to be a crisis. According to Georgetown University Center for Applied Research and the Apostolate, the average number of alleged made against the current clergy members in any given year has dropped precipitously. In the 1970s, there were 6,155. The figure for 1980s was 3,594. There were 770 in the 1990s and 351 in the 2000s. We are now down to single digits. Here is a chart on the number of credible allegations made since the National Review Board began compiling data. Oh, okay. So, if you want to look at the picture, right, it's going to be www.new.us.catholic-sex-abuse-scandal-1.28150479 period. Oh wait, no, that was over Bart Jones. My bad. page numbers. Okay, so this is it. The figures are from the National Review Board audits and the annual report on the implementation of the Charter for the Protection of the Children and Young People, found on the website of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB. Following are the page numbers. Alright, so looks like from 2004 there are 22, 2005 9, 2006 14, 2007 4, 2008 10, 2009 8, 2010 7, 2011 7, 2012 6, 2013 7, 2014 6, 2015 7, 2016 2, 2017 6, 2018 3, 2019 8. The National Review Board has done an excellent work compiling the data, has done a poor job touting the good news. Those responsible for the reports always remind us that one victim is too many, which of course is true, but that should not prevent them from doing a little arithmetic. For example, take the 2018 report. It detailed 26 new allegations involving current minors, 3 of which are substantiated. 3 men were removed from ministry. This means that 0.006% of the 50,648 members of the clergy has had a substantiated accusation made against them in that 1 year period. The 2019 report found 37 new allegations, only 8% or 0.016% out of the 49,972 clergy members could be substantiated. It should not take the Catholic League to do the math and hail the incredible progress, but it does. When it was revealed that there were only 3 substantiated cases made, the chairman of the National Review Board, Francesco Cesario, took the opportunity to say, these current allegations point to the reality that sexual abuse of minors by the clergy should not be considered by the bishop as a thing of the past or a distant memory. That is a pitiful reaction. Ann Burke, who had led the National Review Board, has consistently denied that there has been any progress. At the end of 2019, she said that the problem of the sexual abuse was worse than it had been before. She cited no evidence. There isn't any. No one is calling for a victory lap, but not to acknowledge the incredible progress that has been made is unfair. Moreover, it does nothing to stop the false assumptions that many priests continue to abuse minors. No other institution, religious or secular, has a more impressive record of combating the sexual abuse of minors today than the Catholic Church. Much more about this later. Is the progress wholly a function of Dallas reforms? No, but much of it is. The fact that the number of allegations was declining before the reform is proof that progress cannot be attributed to the new norms alone. For one, the sexual revolution began to wane. It is also true that many of the bishops began to step up, some out of duty and others out of fear. No matter, the naysayers are still with us, refusing to acknowledge the progress. Dr. Mary Gale Frawley O'Day, a psychologist, was invited to address the bishops in Dallas in January. In January 2003, she predicted that the crisis would soon reappear. You will see some kind of bubble in 2005. when the people who were abused in 1990s come forward. She was wrong. It never happened. More accurate, they were Gregory. More accurate were Gregory Erlandson, and Matthew Bunson, who noted in 2010 that the United States Church was for several years at the epicenter of scandals, is now leading the way in established norms and providing guidelines for dealing with priest abuser, assisting the victims, and preventing further crimes. Good news about the progress that has been made is not well received by those who wallowed in bad news. They cannot be found on the far right as well as the far left. The right says the Vatican II made too many reforms. The left says it didn't make enough. Both sides love it when bad news emerges. They go into self-congratulatory mode. When New York Archbishop Timothy Dolan was interviewed on 60 Minutes in 2011, he said the sexual abuse scandal was over with. That sent Jamie Manson, the national Catholic reporter, into orbit. She attacked Dolan for his remark, offering no evidence that he was wrong. He wasn't. 1 year later, on the 10th anniversary of the Boston Globe series on the scandal, the best newspaper could do was publish one throwaway sentence. If matters had deteriorated in the church, it would have run a lengthy front page story. But given good news, it simply wasn't worth saying much about it. Wild accusations that the church has not changed are made all the time from prominent sources. In October 2019, there was an angry editorial in the Washington Post about failure of the Vatican to deal squarely with former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. The editorial was right about that. A full accounting should have been made by then, but those at the newspaper let their emotions color their thinking on matters closer. But those at the newspaper let their emotions color their thinking on matters closer to home. The editorial referred to fresh allegations of rape, assault, molestation, and other outrages, and made the reader think that the scandal is still ongoing. This is simply untrue. Monisgnar Stephen Rossetti, who knows the subject well, noted in 2018 that the first John Jay study found that 4% of priests were accused of abusing minors. This number has plummeted and is now estimated to be less than 1%. Further proof that great progress has been made can be found by reading the various reports issued by dioceses and state attorney generals. In March 2019, the church issuing attorney Jeff Anderson issued a report on accused priests in Illinois over the past half century. There were many media stories about 395 priests named in the report, but most of them were incomplete. Not all were priests. The report included deacons, seminaries, brothers, and nuns. Some priests were from religious orders not under the jurisdiction of a bishop. In other cases, the order priests were not from Illinois, and their alleged offenses, if they happened at all, many have not taken place there. Moreover, these were only allegations, most of which were never substantiated in the court of law. Here's what really counts. Of the 395 persons mentioned, 394 were either dead or out of ministry. That left one guy. Does this not suggest that the scandal is no longer a crisis in the United States? In April 2019, the Diocese of Sacramento released a report on 1,500 clergy members who served in the diocese over the past 70 years. There were 44 accused priests, roughly 3% of the total. Importantly, 3 priests committed roughly half of the abuse. In other words, almost all priests were never involved in sexual molesting minors. In September 2019, Missouri General Eric Schmidt issued a report on sexual abuse committed by priests, deacons in seminaries, and nuns. It was determined that 163 priests out of more than 2,000 who worked in Missouri since World War II had an accusation made against them. More than half were dead. Of the 154 priests for which a date was provided, but all but 15 accusations occurred before 1990, only 3 in the 2010s. 117 occurred in 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. In short, the crisis no longer existed. In October 2019, the Colorado Attorney General released a report on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church over the past 70 years. It found that 166 priests named 5 abused 102 minors, or 61% of the total. In fact, 2 were responsible for 82 of the cases. Fully 84% of the victims were boys, and most were post-pubescent, meaning that their victimizers were homosexuals. Again, we find that a few bad priests accounting for most of the offenses. The situation was similar in New York. In 2019, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, announced that almost all of the abuse occurred in the last century, and that of the 120 priests named in a report, many were dead and none were in the ministry. Alright, so that's the end of that. It's the end of chapter 2.